Welcome back to Son of Chelsea. Daniel Childs here. Team selector time for the game against Aston Villa. Sunday afternoon, Premier League at Stamford Bridge. A game that I think officially kicks off the festive period, but also from a Champions League qualifying point of view is pretty important. I think the next two weekends we face Villa tomorrow and then also Spurs away next weekend. Yes, there are some favourable fixtures in this run, but these two games potentially could be quite defining in the race for Champions League football. I know, quite ridiculous to say as we head into December, but against these teams, if it is going to be close, getting points off them are important. And I think for morale and also being able to beat Aston Villa, who had a decent time of it at Stamford Bridge, winning their last two visits to the bridge. So we need to stop that on Sunday. But of course, Villa's form recently hasn't been great. And Chelsea should be in good form and confidence, but there are some big choices, I think, for Enzo Maresca to make with this starting lineup. I'll give you my predicted lineup before the end of the show. Please do give me your thoughts on the game, your predictions, all of that good stuff in the comments below. So the only real team news, I think, based on from where we were against Heidenheim, and it was kind of spoke about regularly during commentary, is that Pedro Neto is expected to be back. He didn't travel, of course, to Germany midweek, but it was expected that he sort of get through his knock, and also Malo Gusto didn't play, so we suspect both of those will be available for this game against Aston Villa. Whether both start, of course, we'll get to that. Let's move into Aston Villa. No wins in 7. They've lost 2 of their last 4 Premier League games. They were very unfortunate to not beat Juventus in what has been a successful or decent looking Champions League campaign so far. And, you look at that form, no wins in 7, which is poor by recent standards for Aston Villa. And I actually think back to, say, Newcastle last year, who were in a similar situation, qualified for the Champions League. They really struggled with injuries. They went through a mad injury crisis, a bit like Chelsea during the festive period that hurt Eddie Howe in a big way. And the lack of options to rotate was a big issue for him as well. So I was thinking, have they got a massive injury list? You look at their injury list, yes, Onana, the midfielder brought in from Everton in the summer, was, I think, a really good purchase. But, it's not a defining player for Aston Villa. I think he's a good player. And Ramsey too, an exciting attack-minded midfielder. But it's not like they're without their big talisman, Ollie Watkins. I do ponder if it's a bit of having to do with the increased pressure and scrutiny and workload of the Champions League. They've had European football before. They had the Europa Conference League like Chelsea do this year last season. And in that competition, we know you can rotate a bit more. You can't really do that in the Champions League, especially the new Champions League format where you are playing a much higher calibre of opponent on a more frequent basis, especially as we've seen so far. So I think that's impacted them. I also do wonder if the pressure and expectation of the Villa crowd, the club, have risen, and maybe players and staff are kind of adjusting to that, and also opposition are approaching Villa differently. A game against Aston Villa is a lot different in stature to what it was 5-10 years ago. That's a credit to the club, that's a credit to Unai Emery, but maybe they're dealing with that adjustment. But they still have some brilliant players. I mean, Ollie Watkins, of course, is the one that stands out. Great finisher, has finished quite frequently at Stamford Bridge, unfortunately, in recent years. I do concern about his ability to get past our offside line, which I spoke about on yesterday's show. Please go and check it out for sort of the defensive concern under Maresca so far this year. But of course, you've got workmen like John McGinn, who's always been an impactful Premier League player. I think also Yuri Tielemans on his day can be a exquisite and really, careful and creative central midfielder. And then you have wide threats like Leon Bailey. So overall, and Rodgers too, I think has been a decent signing from Middlesbrough. So it's not the case that they lack quality, but there definitely is a good time maybe to play Aston Villa, and that will be what Chelsea are thinking. That's what Maresca is thinking, especially at home at Stamford Bridge, where we haven't been terrible so far this year. And I do wonder tactically the way Villa love to play this high line. Think about how Brighton approached Chelsea a few months ago. I think playing a high line against Chelsea, I'm not going to say suicidal, but I think it is playing a dangerous game. Because if Chelsea get their passing right from deep and the runs from Palmer, Jackson, whoever's in that attacking line, because we've got such speed and I think really good movement and good decision making, I think you could be in real bother. And that is hopefully what Chelsea can look to exploit. Will Villa's recent struggles mean they come to the bridge with a more defensive minded approach and Emery isn't so proactive with that defensive line? But it kind of has been one of the notable and kind of regular things in the way Villa approach games. And I'll argue, would you really want to take that out because it lessens the way they're able to impact teams and progress the ball and kind of really get on the back of teams. So we'll see how that works. Moving into the Chelsea team, I think there are some big decisions for Enzo Maresca. I think for a couple of reasons. The first one is in regards to rotation and the amount of games over the next month, where Maresca, I think, is going to be tested a lot more in actually rotating seriously, because you've got the first midweek Premier League game of the season away at Southampton. How does that impact this lineup? How does that impact future lineups? Potential injuries and suspensions which could be coming. I think that's very interesting to see how Maresca deals with that, because there's been a massive separation so far this year between A and B team. I think that will become more blurred in the upcoming weeks, because it just naturally has to, and that's why you have the bulk of a squad. You have to use them as games become more intense, more draining, especially at this time of the year. And I also think usually at this time of the year, maybe inflicted by the weather, you have to come up with new ways to kind of add energy to the team. So I do ponder if that was something that Maresca is considering. The big one is to start off with Robert Sanchez versus Philip Jorgensen. I did not expect to be talking about this so seriously for this game, but Philip Jorgensen obviously had a brilliant game against Heidenheim. I mean, in terms of the number of saves he made was exquisite, and really it was his first statement performance in a Chelsea shirt. Now, does he come instantly into the Premier League starting lineup? I don't think so. If I put money on the starting lineup, I'm going with Robert Sanchez. That's not my own personal preference of who I would want, because I do think there needs to be competition in that area. I've said it consistently this season, and Jorgensen should be knocking on the door. Hopefully he is now, and maybe because of the number of games, by the beginning of 2025, Philip Jorgensen might be Chelsea's first choice keeper. I think partly based on his performances, but I also think more importantly by Robert Sanchez's flaws, which are pretty persistent and I think pretty expected at this point. So I think Sanchez will start, but that battle is definitely commencing now, and I think it's good. The back four, I think Malo Gusto will start at right back. Didn't play midweek, is now back from his injury, so hopefully he can start to get back to the form we saw last season. I'd like to see him have the freedom to go out wide a lot more. I just don't think this inverted role gets the best out of Malo Gusto. I think he's much more dangerous from an attacking point of view when he's able to go on the overlap and he's able to add width and also cross the ball. I think he's a pretty decent crosser of the ball, quite effective in that sense. So maybe we'll see that in this game. Fofana and Colwell, I think, will be the back two. So no Badiashile, Cucurella left back, who's been one of Chelsea's most consistent performers so far this year. Then we get in central midfield. I think Enzo Fernandez will start again. He's kind of earned this start after last week's performance and goal against Leicester. Hopefully he can continue it. And speaking earlier about that high line, this really is where Enzo Fernandez should come to the fore, because on transition, with the ball at his feet behind the halfway line, I'm expecting him to carve out some passes that really get Chelsea in behind Aston Villa's defence, and obviously has some good memories, quite recent memories against Aston Villa, the last time we played them, with his exquisite free kick in the FA Cup at Villa Park, and obviously joined by Moises Caicedo. Then we get into the three behind the striker, and I may surprise a few people by how much I'm changing this. I'm going to shift Palmer out to the right. Christopher Nkunku starts his first Premier League game since Man City, or at least that's my prediction. And then Jadon Sancho also returns to the Premier League team. Now, it's based on how ready Pedro Neto is. If he's fully ready, I think it is more likely that Pedro Neto starts here. And I have no complaints with Pedro Neto returning to the starting lineup. Obviously, he had a really good run of form before the international break, scored that brilliant goal against Arsenal. I think he's added a lot of energy. And also in transition, as we saw against, say, Newcastle, how impactful he can be in the way he can link up with Palmer and Nicholas Jackson. But I just feel with Sancho returning to the team, I didn't think his performance was outstanding. I think actually in smaller bursts he's had better periods for Chelsea, but obviously was heavily involved to set up the clincher for McCallum Mudryk. And I think Sancho, Mudryk and Neto will be battling for that left wing spot. And that's good. That there should be severe competition, and it gives Maresca the license to rotate at a key point in the season. However, I think Nkunku is the big one there. It's getting Nkunku finally in the Premier League team and seeing how that works. We know Palmer can start off the right, float centrally. Nkunku has been Chelsea's top goal scorer in all competitions so far this year. Until he gets a run in the Premier League, it's very hard to write him off and say he's not good enough to play that role. We need to see it, and I think it's worth doing it now. And as well, Nicholas Jackson, obviously, off the back of his brilliant display against Leicester. That is my starting 11. I want to hear your thoughts about this game. I'm quietly optimistic. I think Chelsea can beat Aston Villa. We need to after our recent run at home against Villa. And given the points so far in the Premier League table, it's not going to be defining, but it really already kind of in the Champions League qualifying sense feels a little bit like a 6-pointer. And I just think morale-wise, it would really hurt Aston Villa. I think boost Chelsea going into an important week where we move in quickly to the Southampton game. And then also, of course, Spurs next weekend, which is always one of the biggest games of the season for Chelsea fans. And in terms of Champions League qualification, even more important this year. So we'll see how Chelsea do. I'm pretty confident. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And I will see you again very soon. All the best.